It's Late Night with David Mancuso! With special guest, Caryl Bryar Fallert-Gentry! And now, without further ado, your host, David Mancuso!
Well, thank you for coming this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a wonderful show tonight, folks. We're really excited here. We have Caryl Bryar Fallert-Gentry with us, and she is, as everybody knows, an award-winning quilt artist for many years. She goes way back with us at Mancuso shows, many ribbons, and she's even has an award at this visual score competition that we did this week. Welcome, Caryl.
Thank you, David. It's nice to be here.
Well, tell us where you are now. Are you in your studio? And
I am in my studio. I live in Port Townsend, Washington, which is right at the northeast corner of the Olympic Peninsula. So all the big ships coming from Japan and China have to go up the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and they turn right at Port Townsend to get to Seattle. So that's where I live, in the middle of a forest. And my studio window on the opposite end that you can see behind me, when the shades are up, I look right out over Puget Sound.
that sounds beautiful.
It is.
I've been around the country in a couple other places, but I've never been to the Pacific Northwest, and it's certainly on my list of things to do. Terry and I love to travel. Are you originally from that area, or tell us where you originally from?
No, I'm from Chicago, and I lived, Elgin, Illinois, where they made the Elgin watches. My father was an Elgin watchmaker, and I lived for 56 years in the western suburbs of Chicago and 1 year in the city. So I was there for a long time.
Okay. So we had a little picture of you up as a child, and so we thought that would be fun. Yeah. So before we continue, let me ask you some more about your moving around. So you were in Elgin, Illinois, 56 years. I don't know, you don't look like you were anywhere 56 years yet, but that's another story, right? So I know that a lot of people know that you were in Paducah, Kentucky for a while, home of AQS.
Yeah.
Tell us how that came about.
Well, my first husband was retired and wanted to move someplace warmer, which is not hard to do when you live in Chicago. And I had been going to Paducah since the very first AQS show in 1985, and going then again to teach at the museum every year. And in 2004, when I was teaching at the museum, there was a young woman in the class who had just moved to Paducah under an artist relocation program. And the city, in order to clean up their historic district and rescue it from the slumlords, they were offering derelict properties to artists from all over the country. And so we drove down to Paducah and looked into this, and decided that we were going to move to Paducah. And I built an 8,000 square foot studio home, classroom, gallery, 3 blocks from the National Quilt Museum.
Beautiful, beautiful. What year was that?
That was 2005.
2005, okay. Yeah, we've switched centuries, I know.
Right, yeah.
So you were there for how many years?
9 years.
9 years. And now you're in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes. So, a year and a half after we moved to Paducah, my first husband died unexpectedly. And I still thought I would live in Paducah for the rest of my life. I had built the studio of my dreams. I had wonderful friends. But then right at the end of 2011, I met the man of my dreams, and guess where he lived? Port Townsend, Washington.
Not a bad place.
We tried driving back and forth a couple times a year and got tired of the 2,000-mile drive, and it just made sense to retire here. I have family who live in the Puget Sound area, so
You do, okay, so there's a little bit more of a connection there.
yes.
That's great. Um, so let's go way back when. We have this great image of you, and I believe it's in mid 1970s as a stewardess for United Airlines. Can you tell us how that?
Yeah. Well, when I graduated from college, I hadn't been able to afford a junior year abroad, and I always wanted to travel. So I was hired by United Airlines right out of college and thought I would do that for a couple of years and then get a real job. And I never did get a real job. I worked for United Airlines till I was 50. And by that time, I had a full-blown career traveling all over the world teaching quilting. So I started a business instead of getting a real job.
Very interesting. We also have another image of you. I think it's in '82. Is there really a quilt hanging off the wing of that plane?
No, I kind of photoshopped
Oh,
it.
I kind of thought that might have been put in.
That went
Really
along
good
with
edit, really
story.
good editing.
It went along with a good story.
So then how did the quilting start within this?
Well, in 1974, my first husband and I bought a farm in Missouri from an 89-year-old woman named Ida Voss, who had made quilts her whole life and still made quilts. And she invited us to her house, and she opened her closet door, and inside was a stack of quilts that went all the way up to the shelf. And she started getting quilts out and showing them to me, and I was just absolutely enthralled. I'd been sewing since I was 10 years old, so sewing was not a new thing. And I'd been an artist since before I could remember. So I went right home and bought a book about quilting and made my first quilt, which, trust me, was not a masterpiece because I knew nothing about constructing quilts. And no one warned me that it was addictive.
Now, did your mother teach you to sew? Who taught you to sew?
Yes, my mother crocheted and sewed, and she almost always had some kind of a do-it-yourself project going. She was very creative. And so it seemed perfectly normal to me to do stuff with my hands and make things.
All right. So next to the quilt that is one of the quilts that was in the farmhouse owner's collection, I see that we also have an image of an oil painting. And did you work earlier in oils, or how did that come about?
I started painting, well, when I was a kid, I did watercolors, and then in college, I did acrylics, and then I started oil painting after I graduated from college. And that's actually a picture, a photograph of a painting that I did of the farm that we bought in Missouri from the woman who made the quilt next to it.
That's what I thought with the way you grouped them together.
Right.
Kind of nice. You had also provided me, and this really sent chills up my spine, because I knew this great lady, and she taught for us many times and was involved with our shows, particularly in the early days. But you sent me a wonderful image of Jean Ray Laurie, and since I've been in the business, and I would say a whole generation has passed, and I don't, I really know that because I'm now in my mid 60s, and I was in my mid 30s when I started doing the quilting shows, and with my brother Peter, and so we were always fond of Jean Ray Laurie, but there's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of viewers right now that are watching this that know who Jean Ray Laurie is, but there's probably a lot that don't. Can you tell us a little bit something about Jean Ray Laurie and how she's influenced you? Or
yes, well, she was one of the big quilting superstars in the early 80s when I was just starting out in quilting. And I was working for the airline, hauling this quilt that you saw hanging off the wing of the airplane in my garment bag and hand quilting on my layovers. And I was in Buffalo, New York, and I ran out of thread. And the clerk at the hotel sent me down to a quilt shop that was like a block away. And at the checkout counter of this quilt shop was this calendar of contemporary art quilts made by all the big superstars of the time, Michael James and oh gosh, the list goes on and on. And I was just absolutely gobsmacked. As I was gaping at this calendar, the owner of the shop invited me to a lecture that evening with Jean Ray Lowry. She said she's talking about quilting or the breakfast dishes. And I sort of couldn't imagine anybody giving a lecture about quilting, but I had nothing better to do that evening, and the museum was 3 blocks away. So I walked down there and walked into my life. This was like the epiphany of my entire career, because the room was full of enthusiastic quilters. And so far, the only quilter I knew was Ida Voss. And Jean Ray Lowry gave this wonderful lecture. And, here's this smart, educated woman with a master's degree in art from Stanford University. And she makes quilts as art and gets paid for them. And she traveled around the country talking about quilts, and she got paid for that too. And I just went, okay, if this is possible, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, a novel idea and a good one. And,
right.
And she was really something else. Yeah. Her lectures were really held you in her workshops. And
as I got to know her over the years, she was a complete class act and just my hero. My role model.
For those of you that don't know, Jean, I think passed in 2011, I think, possibly.
Yeah, it was on the slide. I don't remember just what year it was.
Here somewhere, but yeah, she was a great lady, and it's interesting. That is really talk about circumstances that you happen to be looking for the thread, and you happen to go into that quilt shop. That's you talk about like fate and circumstances and
yeah.
That's a great
and
thing.
15 years later, I was actually invited to teach at that same quilt conference at the Amherst Museum in Buffalo, New York. So it all came around.
Very nice. Yeah, very exciting. Really nice. So we have your first through the gazebo window was your first best of show. Is that correct?
It was. It was kind of the quilt that launched my professional career. It won best of show in 4 different national shows that year. It's anymore, it might not even be juried in, but at that time it was winning the top awards. And so, of course, as soon as you win an award like that, people start asking, oh, do you teach and do you lecture? And so the year after I made that quilt was the first time I did a quilt lecture and the first time I taught a workshop.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I remember it hanging in the shows. So I have this other crazy thing. So obviously your career went on and so let's talk a little bit about your creativity. Do you, as an example, do you sketch first? And so everybody has like a different process. What is the process that you use to create?
Usually I sketch first, and I really like the hand-heart connection. So a lot of times my sketches are by hand with pencil, but then I use the computer as part of the design process in almost everyone. Of course, everyone is different, but usually I take my hand-drawn sketch and scan it into Caryl Draw, which is my drawing program. And then I start messing with it. I try colors if I need to. I try different backgrounds. I try, if it's rectangular, maybe I'll make it into a square or mirror image it and repeat it. And, I just play around with it and see what else I could do with that. I do a lot of doodling. So.
Right. We also, we have an image of I guess the first best of show, which was an award a purchase award from American Quilter Society in Paducah, Kentucky. Tell us a little bit about that quilt, its title.
Yes. I won that purchase award in 1989 with a contemporary quilt that was machine quilted. And it was the first time a machine quilted quilt had won Best of Show at the AQS show. And it caused an uproar. Some people were coming up to me and going, "Oh, thank goodness, now we can finish our quilts. We have permission to machine quilt." But there were just as many people who were kind of stamping their feet and huffing off and writing nasty letters to AQS. But interestingly enough, 6 years later, when I won that same award for the second time over it, and nobody was mad. So
it is interesting because the first generation, and what I know is the first generation of quilters, of course, there was a lot more emphasis on hand quilting.
Sure,
and so I tell this story often that I remember having a judge in the early days. Peter and I were doing one of the Mid-Atlantic Quilt Festivals when it was still in Williamsburg, Virginia, before we moved it to Hampton. And we had a judge. I had a judge say to me, she said, "Listen, if it doesn't fit on a bed, it's not a quilt." And I'm like, "Oh boy, I'm in trouble." Because I love the wall hanging and the innovative and now we've gone into a whole other phase, modern, and what we call mid-century modern. So
right, exactly.
All right, so I think we have a little bit of technical, maybe. Oh, okay, very good. I'm leaning on my own keyboard. Sorry. Okay, then we also have Flying Free #2, and I believe that won Best of Show, and I want to say 1996 Pennsylvania National Quilt Extravaganza.
Yes, it did, and this was the only national competition that quilt was in. I made it in 1985, showed it at your show in 1986, and then it toured in a solo exhibition that I was doing starting 86, 87, I might have gone to 88. And then I already had a 50% deposit on it before it started traveling, so I sold it immediately as soon as it got back. So it was not in a lot of shows.
Right. Does this one have kind of a crazy story behind it, or?
Well, it does.
Why do I think I remember that?
Yeah, it has a kind of sad story. The woman who bought it paid mega bucks for it, and she had a large collection not only of contemporary quilts but also valuable antique quilts. And unfortunately, in later life, she suffered from dementia. And one day, she wasn't sure what to do with this big collection of quilts, and she had a brainstorm, and she donated all of them to the Salvation Army. And I have no idea what they did with them, but her family called every Salvation Army in Chicago and was never able to retrieve them. So this very valuable collection that was worth tens of thousands, well, probably well over $100,000. Gone. If you ever see that quilt,
if I see it again, I'll recognize it. It might be out there somewhere.
Right.
You don't know. I'll go back to creativity for one moment, because I think every artist experiences this. Tell us about creative block and what you do, and do you get creative block?
Well, I do, as I said, I do a lot of doodling, and I keep all my doodles in a file folder. It used to be in a physical file folder. Now it's a file folder on my computer. But I also look, I take a lot of photographs, especially now that I'm traveling with my my new husband. And I also just, if something really inspires me and makes my heart beat faster, I'll save that into a file. And then if I'm stuck for what the next idea is, I just start going through those pictures until something catches my eye that looks like it would be fun. And when I have a whole bunch of ideas, I always pick the one I think will be the most fun.
Right. Yeah, I'm not, I like to think I'm a creative person, but when I see the quilts, I'm not. So I must have a lot of creative block. But you had some time back, you had did a series of quilts that were, I think they pertain to audience participation. What the angle that you looked at them, and tell us what that was and what that was about.
Yeah, well, these were my high-tech tuck quilts. I started dyeing fabric in gradations in 1984, and by 86, I was thinking of all the things I could do with all this hand-dyed gradations. And it occurred to me one day that I could make three-dimensional tucks. And I kind of I did a little experimenting and invented this high-tech tuck method in 1986. And I've taught thousands of other people how to do it over the years. But what happens is these tucks are three-dimensional and then they're pieced into a background. So the background is flat. The tucks are one gradation on the left side and a second gradation on the right side. And then you sew them back so they twist in opposite directions. And so as you look at the quilt from one end, you see the one gradation. As you walk past it, you see the background. And when you look at it from the other direction, you see a completely different quilt. So I call it viewer participation art. It's kind of
I remember seeing it. How long ago was that you did that? That was
well, I made my first ones in 86, and one of them was on the cover of the Quilt National Catalog in 87. And oh golly, it was probably well into the 90s, late 90s. When I made the last one. And, you know, I never say I've made the last one. Who knows? I might make another one of these days, but I made well over 100.
Wow.
Just in that style.
Wow. So now one of the things that always intrigues me about quilters, one of them is publishing. Have you published at all or?
Yeah, well, I've written 2 books, but I figured after writing 2 books, I discovered that the people who make money on the books you write are the publisher, and that if I wanted to make money, I needed to make something myself. So when I started publishing instructions and patterns, I put my instructions on CD and sold them as digital workshops. But I've been in hundreds, well, I haven't counted how many publications I've been in, or maybe I did, but I forgot. I'm not good with numbers. I've been in hundreds of other people's publications. So if you've seen my work a lot, it's not my publications, it's other people's stuff.
I remember the original Quilters newsletter magazine with Bonnie Lehman and then Mary Lehman Austin taking it over.
Right.
And in the old days, in order to get a really good, because they gave us the cover quite often. They were great sponsors. And in the old days, we would, and I know you made the cover with that quilt, and we would actually take the quilts to another magazine company and have them photographed.
Right.
And then send them, the slide images, so with the technology has changed so much.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Yeah.
I had to eventually buy a 4x5 format camera, and that explains why I got published so often, in part because I sent them good images.
Yeah, what we used to go through to get really good images.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So the other thing that always amazes me about quilters and quilt artists and instructors is traveling. There's everybody that's in this world of quilting it seems to be a real traveler. And of course, you must have been a mega traveler because you were a stewardess for United Airlines.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you got
careers overlapped.
Traveling.
Careers overlapped for 11 years. So,
right, 11 years. So what would you say in the quilt end of traveling? What is the most interesting place you think you've been, or do you have a story or anything out of the travel aspect of this?
It would be a 3-way tie between South Africa, Alice Springs, Australia, in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories.
Tell me where Yellowknife, Northwest Territories.
It is north of the Great Slave Lake. It's as far north as Fairbanks. It's practically in the Arctic Circle in the Northwest Territories of Canada.
Wow. Okay.
It's,
and
it's not an easy place to get to.
So all of that traveling. So those are your top three.
Well, those are the most unusual.
Most unusual. Okay. What's your favorite?
Oh, golly.
Tell me it's Italy. That's my favorite.
Yeah. Well, I haven't taught in Italy. Well, gosh, there's so many places that I like. I think Asilomar, that was my favorite place to teach.
Beautiful.
It's right. Yeah. You know where Asilomar is. It's on the coast between Monterey and the Pebble Beach golf course.
I know it. I know the venue. I know the wonderful ladies that run it.
Yes.
And I'm really hoping to see them get it back up after this crazy pandemic world. And they've been very supportive of our shows too. And their format of doing the full week,
yes,
is really nice. It's really, and the place can't be prettier.
Oh, couldn't possibly be. It's just, it gives you energy just being there.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So tell us what you're up to next.
Oh, golly. Well, this weekend, I'm hanging a solo exhibition of my digital quilts in Tillamook, Oregon. Tillamook is right on the coast west of Portland. The only thing there is a quilt museum and the Tillamook cheese factory. Well, you know, they're just barely open, but the show will be up for 2 months. So hopefully by the end of June, the pandemic will have settled down a little bit and people will be able to travel a little bit more.
I think we're certainly going in the right direction on that. And it is tough asking people that question in the past 10 months. It's like, what are you doing next? And it's like, well, I'm going to bed. I'm going to stay home and work.
We haven't been anywhere for a year. So this will be our first eating in a restaurant, first staying in a hotel. But we are fully vaccinated.
Yes, that's good.
Everybody get your vaccination.
I think the more and more people that get vaccinated, we could certainly get this under control. And we're starting to see a lot of green lights ahead of us. So yeah. Hopefully we'll be in good shape. Would you like to mention anything else, or as we wind it down? Or
well, the show that I'm doing this weekend is my digital quilts. My husband is a very serious amateur photographer, and I get his leftover cameras that are very good. And so we're traveling all over the world taking photographs, and so I'm using my photographs in some of my quilts, and some of my digital quilts are photographic, and others I'm just designing on the computer and designing custom fabric and having it commercially printed by Spoonflower. But we went to Antarctica in January, just before the pandemic. I don't know if you can see this.
Beautiful.
This is my first iceberg quilt.
Beautiful.
And then this is one that I designed like a month ago, just designed on the computer. And it's kind of part of a new series called Zigzags and Circles. So.
That's beautiful stuff. The one actually goes almost to the modern, the zigzags and circles are
right. Yes, well, I'm wondering if that's where I can enter it, maybe.
Right. It's very, very nice. So I guess we're winding it down here. We know what you're doing next. We hope to see you soon. We hope to see more of your quilts. That's for sure. And so I want to thank you very much for joining me tonight. And this has been a great late night.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun.
Okay, thank you.